Okay, you're good.
Okay, well, good morning, committee members, OWEB staff, and those joining us today on YouTube. For the record, my name is Dan Brown, and I co-chair the grant committee with Barbara Boyer, who is unable to join us this morning. But we want to remind everybody that this is a virtual meeting being streamed live on OWEB's YouTube channel and recorded. For those of you watching on YouTube, the meeting materials are in the board and committee section of the OWEB website. And the committee materials are towards the bottom of the page. And so you can go there and click on the relevant committee and have access to the current meeting materials, as well as all of the past meeting recordings are there. For welcome and introductions, I'm just gonna call on committee and OWEB staff members to introduce themselves. Again, I'm Dan Brown. I am on the board as a ex officio member from EPA. And why don't I call on Chris Allen, who just happens to be up in the top corner of my screen.
Thanks, Dan, and good morning, everybody. Chris Allen, also an ex officio member of the board representing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Thanks, Chris. Liza Jane.
I'm Liza Jane McAllister. I live in Wallowa County. I represent the public at large and serve as a co-chair of the OWEB board.
Thanks, Liza Jane. Lindsay.
Morning, everybody. Lindsay McClary, OWEB board member, public at large.
Thanks, Lindsay. Elizabeth.
Ekpawa.
I'm sorry.
Liz.
Liz, yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi, Dan. Good morning. Liz Ekpawa, board member and representative from the Oregon Board of Forestry.
Thank you, Liz. I'm looking at a split screen, so I think I got all the board members. Did I miss anybody? Okay, then how about OWEB, Lisa?
Good morning, everybody. Lisa Sharplow Hansen, Executive Director for OWEB.
And Eric H.
Good morning, everyone. Eric Hartstein, Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator at OWEB.
Eric W.
Good morning, everyone. Eric Williams, Grant Program Manager at OWEB.
Courtney.
Courtney Schaff, Monitoring and Reporting Program Manager at OWEB. Good morning.
And Liz.
Good morning, Liz Redon, Willamette, Regional Program Representative at OWEB.
Gotcha. Oh, Katie.
Good morning, Katie Duzick, Regional Program Representative for the North Coast for OWEB.
And Nicole.
Good morning. My name is Nicole Betnardi. I'm the executive assistant here at OWEB.
All right. I think that is, oh, Brian. I'm sorry, Brian.
Oh, that's okay, Dan. Hi, I'm Brian Wolcott. I'm the manager of the Water Acquisition Program, and I've been assisting with the Council Capacity Program.
Great. Did I miss any OWEB staff that are on? No. Okay, great. Thanks. So the first, so our agenda, besides the welcome and introductions, has 3 topics today. So first off is public comment. And then we're going to talk about the Watershed Council capacity funding. And then we're going to talk about the water acquisition grant offering. So before we jump into the agenda, I just wanted to check in with folks to see if there was anything else we needed to add to this agenda.
Nothing to add.
Not hearing anything, we'll go into public comments. We have 2 people signed up for a public comment today. And we also have 2 written comments. The 2 written comments are one comment letter from the Columbia County commissioners, all 3 of them, and a second written comment from Chip, and I may mess up on the pronunciation of his last name. Bubble, maybe it's B-U-B-L, and Chip is with Oregon State University. And both of those comments had to do with the Lower Columbia Watershed Council. And signed up for verbal comments. I'm just going to read these in the order that they came in. We have Greta Holmstrom from Greater Yamhill Watershed Council, and then Jordan Anderson from Greater Yamhill Watershed Council. So Nicole, I'm not sure how we time the comments or what we do with that, but maybe I can hand it over to you to kick that off.
Sure, I can get a timer going, of course. And then this is a meeting, so Greta and Jordan can unmute themselves when, yeah, so you can go ahead and call and I will set the timer going.
Go ahead, Greta.
Hello, I'm the new executive director for the Greater Yamhill Watershed Council. I'm here to make comment about the proposed reduction to capacity funding for the council. Advocating, of course, for full capacity funding. The council has been on a positive path forward. We had a recent resignation of the previous executive director that kind of left about a year gap in the work of the council. But in the past 6 months, we've had quite a bit of positive momentum and are hoping to receive full funding so that we can continue that. And I have kind of 3 areas I'd like to focus on. The first is that we have, in the past 6 months, taken steps to make the organization more effective. That includes hiring me as the new executive director. We have onboarded 2 new board members in January, and we also just recruited a new board member this past month. So that gives the council a total of 7 board members. We have retained contract staff for our administrative and accounting services to help provide stability in the organization. We're holding regular board meetings. We have formed a policy review subcommittee to work on our organizational policies. And we've also just launched an update to our 10-year-old strategic plan so that we can get a better feel of the needs in the community and how we can best serve them. We've also made recent progress in developing restoration projects. Those have included working on 2 grant applications for culvert replacements that both benefit fish passage. We've been meeting extensively with urban landowners who are interested in developing restoration projects, mostly large-scale projects. And we're also in discussion with some of our neighboring watershed councils to develop a regional focused investment partnership proposal, hopefully for 2025. We've also had a robust stakeholder outreach and education presence in 2023 so far. I've personally met with over 40 stakeholders and partner organizations, learning what the opportunities are for the council and what needs exist within our watershed. We've put out 10 public outreach events, with several more scheduled for the remainder of the summer. We've had a lot of excitement from the community, people signing up, wanting to volunteer, wanting to get to know the council better. And we've also engaged a consultant to completely overhaul our website, recognizing that that needs to be more accessible. And that will be completed either later this month or in the first part of July. So we're excited, we're reinvigorated and motivated to serve the Greater Yamhill Watershed community. We have a growing volunteer and board base that we can draw from that has a diversity of expertise. And we really feel like it has the energy to make a difference. This is really a great opportunity, I think, for the state to have an active watershed in the Greater Yamhill. So we're hopeful to have full capacity funding to be able to continue that success.
Great. Thanks, Greta. And Jordan, you're up next if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So hi, my name is Jordan Anderson. I'm the board chair of the Greater Yamhill Watershed Council, and also here to comment on hopefully receiving full funding for our council capacity grant. Greta really hit on most of the important markers, but I just wanted to do a little bit of background on how the board went about hiring Greta and getting the organizational health to hire a new director. So when the previous director resigned in spring of 2022, our board chair resigned at that point in time as well. So I just took leadership of the council when all of it took place. So upon taking leadership of the council, I took the following steps to provide better organizational health and financial stability to be able to hire a new executive director. So that included continuing to hold regular monthly board meetings for the public, holding multiple executive sessions to plan a path forward. We held meetings with the network of Oregon watershed councils to get their support and their input on how to move forward. We retained our administrative contractor and hired an accountant to take care of all our accounting. We also updated our financial policy document to address organizational health and meet OWEB's concerns and grant requirements for the requests. We resubmitted our council capacity grant for the 21-23 biennium to secure funding to hire the new director. We were also able to close out all the outstanding reports to OWEB during this time prior to Greta's hiring. We also completed 2 small grant restoration projects on Oak Prairie Restoration. This was in partnership with the Yamhill Soil and Water Conservation District. Both of these projects are now in the post-grant establishment phase and have ongoing maintenance activities occurring. We also held the original partnership meetings with ODFW and the BLM to pursue the culvert replacement projects that Greta mentioned. We have now submitted applications for. And then we also hired an HR firm to help with the hiring of the new executive director. So with that, I just wanted to reiterate the council is very excited to be reinvigorated with new leadership and motivated to support our community. So we are hopeful to be provided with full capacity funding moving forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jordan. Appreciate both of you guys taking the time to share your comments with us this morning. Moving
Dan, do you want me to
on
jump in now?
Agenda item, the next agenda. Oh, I'm sorry, what?
Go ahead, Dan.
It says my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want me to jump in with the
Yeah.
next agenda item?
I was about to kick it over to you, Courtney, so go right ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you, Greta and Jordan, this morning for providing public comment. As Dan noted at the beginning of the meeting, there is also 2 written public comments associated with just this agenda item. So just framing this up today, especially since we have a lot of new board members here today, we award Watershed Council capacity grants once a biennium. There are 2 attachments to the staff report that we provided ahead of the meeting. The first is just the really brief overview of the process and the recommendations, and the second 2 attachments were the merit criteria as well as the review process, because we do a 2-step review process for council capacity grants, an internal one and then an external one with a review team. So for this biennium, what we wanted to do today is bring to the grants committee a preview of what OWEB staff recommendation is and what we are planning on bringing to the full board in July. What this shows is that essentially focuses on the councils that went through the secondary review process. So those are the councils that after the initial review, staff determined we had some follow-up questions for them and some concerns related to how they met all of the merit criteria. So the way the council capacity process is developed is because these are 2-year grants that support capacity of organizations. We want to provide the councils and the board the opportunity to answer our questions before we develop a staff funding decision recommendation. So we brought 5 councils in for the interviews with the external review team. 2 of those councils, after those interviews, were recommended for full funding by staff with the review team in consensus of that recommendation. 2 watershed councils were recommended for reduced funding, the Greater Yamhill and the Umatilla. Both of those demonstrated that they are working towards meeting all of the merit criteria and show the potential to be on a positive trajectory, but definitely demonstrated that during the last 2 years of the biennium, they didn't meet all the merit criteria. And so as you would see in this report, we've recommended them for reduced funding with benchmarks that they would need to meet in order to receive the second year of funding. And then 1 council demonstrated inadequate performance across all of the merit criteria, and the staff and review team recommended them for a do not fund recommendation. What we're seeking today, staff are seeking today from the board, is what questions do you have? What information can OWEB staff prepare and bring to you at the July meeting to help the full board deliberate and make council capacity grant awards? This committee today, we are not asking for a recommendation. We are just asking to understand what questions you might have, what additional information OWEB staff can bring to July to help with the deliberation in preparation for the discussion. So I will stop there and see what questions you have or discussion.
Folks have thoughts to offer to Courtney? I have a question, of course.
Great.
And it's as typical, it's grounded in my ignorance of most things.
Excellent.
But so my understanding is, some of these councils, like you just mentioned, are potentially recommended for reduced funding and or no funding. And when I read the report, that you sent out prior to this meeting, it, as you just said, it sort of indicates these deficiencies. So my question is so they had been funded, and so
Dan, we're losing you again. You might want to try turning off your camera.
Did they not use that funding that was provided to them, or that money? Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes. So I think what I heard you ask is, are they currently funded? Yes. All of the councils ahead, 4 of the 5 councils that went through the secondary review process are currently funded. The Tillamook Bay Watershed Council was not funded for the last 2 biennia and is recommended for funding moving forward based on the work that they have done to meet the merit criteria. So I think and I'm going to try to frame a lot of this in questions today so I can think about what information to bring back to the board. It sounds like, Dan, it would be beneficial in July for us to talk about how much funding they received last biennium and talk in a little bit more detail about how they spent those funds.
Yeah, and primarily my thought was, if they hadn't done kind of what was expected of them to do, then to me, that makes me think that maybe there's money left over, but maybe they can't use that money going forward. But Lindsay has her hand up with something much more intelligent to offer. So go for it, Lindsay.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for all of that background information. Kind of thinking forward to July, what might help with deliberations. Something that comes to mind for me is those that are recommended for reduced or no funding. Do they have to wait another 2 years, or is there a checkpoint? Question 1. Question 2 is this completely on the Watershed Council themselves, or is there like a work plan that they can Is there someone shepherding from OWEB, or are they completely on their own, independent, and just kind of have to come back?
Okay. So the council capacity grants are offered once a biennium. And so a council that would be recommended for do not fund would not have an opportunity to reapply again until next biennium. Same with those that are reduced funding. It is for a biennium. You will see in the staff recommendation, and this is what we will bring in July, is we are due for those that we are recommending for reduced funding. We do actually want to bring back to the board a check-in with the board, asking the board to decide how much funding they should get in the second biennium with a staff recommendation. And so the reduced funding, councils do have a chance to check in with the board halfway through the biennium. A do not fund council is a full biennium do not fund recommendation, and staff do recognize that is a serious recommendation, and we don't take it lightly.
Liz?
Hey, Dan and Courtney, this is truly a question of being ignorant, given my early status on the board. So my question would be, we've had full funding and reduced funding. Just listening to the public comments so far, we see a council that is reinvigorated and moving along. Is there an opportunity to look at the strides that they've made and their trajectory and have some portion or some middle ground, or is that all already considered for funding? Taking a look at, where they've been and where they're going.
Thanks, Liz. That's a great question. So I think what I hear you saying is when we come into July, you'd like us to talk a little bit about how do we take into account what they've done for the last 2 years, as well as what they are now proposing to do to address some of the challenges we identified, and how can we take that into consideration, both in the current staff funding recommendation and in the check-in that we're proposing with the board halfway through the biennium.
Exactly, Courtney.
Great. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks, Liz. Anybody else? Courtney, I have one more thought, just because, again, I get confused easily. On the last subcommittee meeting, as well as I think it was in the last board meeting, we talked about this funding in the context of sort of like narrowing the gap and equaling the playing field and ensuring that, that these, we all sort of agreed that these councils are super important to be sustained with a more regular level of funding. And so I think it'd be important to talk to the board about, this seems, in my mind, again, just to deviate from that. And so I think it's just going to be important to have a little conversation about, in context of that previous conversation, like why we're kind of coming out with something that, again, in my mind, seems a little contradictory to that prior conversation.
Thanks, Dan. So what I hear is making sure that we address, we've been advocating for increased funding for watershed councils because they're important in the implementation of the Oregon plan and working with federal and local partners. And then we have recommendations of reduced funding and do not funding, and just how do we reconcile those two paths?
Yeah, thanks. And as last time, Lindsay's following me up with something more intelligent.
Not really, Dan, but thank you. Yeah, kind of building off of that, feel strongly that projects on the ground get done when people are in place to do those. And a lot of council capacity is funded by OWEB. But just thinking forward to July again, what might help if it's not too big of a lift for staff is some of these that are reduced or do not fund, it might help to have a little snapshot of history, how long the council's been going. Has there been delinquency in the past? Is this something we've seen before, or is there anomaly? I see in the staff report that, you know, there is some information about, you know, staff have left, or, you know, is this residual from COVID, or just a little bit of context of in the big picture, this is a small bump in the road for them. But also do feel strongly that it also shouldn't just be general funds that are allocated. There should be demonstration of utilization of the funds responsibly and leading to greater impacts on the ground, and realize that, you know, across however many districts there are, 40 some watershed councils or more, there is going to be kind of ebb and flow, and this is not permanent, but it makes total sense that sometimes folks have to take a step back to make another step forward.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I did forget to mention in my opening remarks, we are developing full evaluations of strengths, concerns, and concluding analysis for each council that we reviewed. Because the grants committee is 6 weeks ahead of the board meeting, those aren't quite finalized yet. So those have not been posted. All that information will be provided to the board and to applicants fairly close to the week of July 4th, as it's being finalized. Okay, great. So we'll definitely make sure we're providing that history. One of the things we can also provide to the board and put in the packets is the applications of all of these 5 that went through the secondary review process. They're not very long applications like our restoration one, so that context will probably be beneficial to our board members. And I see Liza Jane has her hand up.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm wondering about the way that you mentioned a positive trajectory having value. I'm wondering what level of value, how you measure that, and how do we measure that amount of reduced funding? Is it across the board? Is it kind of case by case, or that would be good to know for me?
Yes, so we have actually a formula for full funding and reduced funding. Reduced funding is 80% of the full funding recommendation. So what we're looking at for the 23-25 biennium is our full funding recommendation is $166,000 and change. Our reduced funding recommendation is $132,000, and actually the reduced funding level going into next biennium is actually very similar to the full funding level from this biennium, because we did give them a big bump up. So there's actually a very, you know, if you received full funding this biennium and you were to receive reduced funding next biennium, it's not actually a very big drop at all in funding level. So for context, but we'll make sure we lay out those numbers in July.
Lisa?
Thanks, Dan. So Courtney, and I would ask the committee this, given some of the conversations I've been having with people, I appreciate that we're going to go ahead and put the reviews for the board members to be able to look at. Is there a way to summarize any of that information in a table to make it easier to digest at a higher level? Just thinking about time.
Can you ask the question again, Lisa? I'm trying to understand what you're asking.
Is there a way to summarize the individual analysis that we've done into a table or something that's quicker for our board to look at? And
so the evaluations are 1 page. Are you talking about the evaluation?
Yes. Is there a way to summarize the evaluations in a table or something, rather than have the board have to read through all of them?
We'll have to think about that. I'm not sure. I mean, it's just 5 pages total of evaluations for these 5 councils. They're only 1 page each. I think we can provide a graphic of kind of maybe the history of the organizations and funding levels. That might be more, but we can think about that. I'm not sure a table would save much time.
I just would like, I think having something that's a picture for them rather than just the narrative, because I know people are struggling with time and the volume of information that we have in our packets is significant. And so trying to give some more summary might be helpful.
Other questions or other information that we can provide to you. So I've got a great list of questions that you all asked, and we will frame that up in information we provide back to you, either in the staff report and in the presentation. We will be including the evaluations of these 5, so you can have that information, and the applications. And we will make sure we touch on funding, history, the trajectory. What do we mean by positive versus declining trajectory? And we'll do our best to prepare.
Great.
And I also just want, for those that are on or listening, all the public comment letters, the 2 public comment letters that were provided to you today as part of this committee meeting, we will be providing to the full board because of the importance of this decision and the weight of a do not fund recommendation. We will be providing those public comment letters and any additional ones we receive as part of the full board meeting in July.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. And thank you to you and the OWEB staff for helping us properly account for public funds. I mean, that's sort of at a big picture level, the way I'm looking at this is just, this is public money that we need to account for and make sure it's being used. Uh-oh, we got a couple more hands. Liza, Jane.
Thank you, Dan. Courtney, I just remembered something that was done in the past for the board on these capacity grants. And that was a question about all the work that our staff does to support councils prior to this place. So I think that's really important to know that so much work is done so that everybody gets funding. And so if you could recap that, it's really, really valuable as well.
Great. Thanks, Liza Jane.
And Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you. One last question, something that came to mind, maybe Courtney, this is already on your radar, but at the full board meeting, will you address at all where any additional leftover funds in this line item will be available for the board to reallocate, or will be available for the reduced funding that has a check-in with the board? Can you just maybe make a note on talking about what does that mean for those any leftover monies?
Thanks, Lindsay.
All right, are we ready to move on? I'm looking. 3, 2, 1. All right, we're rolling. To our last agenda item, which is water acquisitions grant offering. And I'm going to hand that over to Eric Williams and Brian.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dan. I'm going to provide a little bit of an overview and background, a little bit of history, but not too much in the interest of time, and then turn it over to Brian for the details. So the topic here is our water acquisition grant solicitation. This was one of the solicitations that was paused back in 2020 during our budget reduction period due to the lottery shutdown during COVID. And just before that shutdown, we had completely revamped the water acquisition rules. And so we had kind of a lot of excitement and enthusiasm going in, and then had to shut things down. And, as time went on and our revenues recovered, in addition to our lottery revenues recovering, the legislature during the short session last year appropriated $10 million for OWEB's water acquisition program. And so now it went from being paused to having lots of funding available. And so with that appropriation, we were also able to hire staff, and we're really excited to be able to bring Brian Walcott into the program, who's got considerable experience with water acquisitions as well as Watershed Council work. And as I mentioned before, Brian will give you the details on the solicitation. So with the solicitation, we received 2 eligible applications. And what we want to do here today is walk through some of the complexities of these 2 applications, because they are complex, and kind of similar to what Courtney did with the council capacity, is make sure that we know areas that we need to be prepared for the full board meeting. And as Courtney mentioned, we're working through the evaluations for all of the projects that will come before you in July. And so we don't have completed staff reports yet at this point in time, but we felt it important to walk through the mechanics of these 2 applications, what they're seeking in terms of water acquisition funding. And while we don't have staff recommendations prepared yet, we want to make sure that when we come to the board in July, we're prepared to answer questions you might have and make sure that we're bringing the information that you need to make your award decisions on these. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Brian to describe those 2 applications, and then we'll walk through to see what further questions that you might have. So go ahead, Brian.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Just what I wanted to do is just go through a little bit of background of the program, fill in a few gaps that Eric didn't mention, and then go through a bit of a summary on each of the 2 proposals that we've been reviewing, talk about the review process and some of the complexities that we're challenged with and how we're working through that to complete an evaluation. As Eric mentioned, the program rules were updated in 2022, or were updated in 2020, and then the grant application and guidance were updated for the 2022 solicitation that was put out in November. And out of that, we had 4 applications come in, 2 that ended up being ineligible, but then there were 2 that did move through and went on to our review process. And that review process has changed a bit. In the past, there was a larger role taken on by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Their Columbia Water Transaction Program staff would have a more dominant role in that, but now they're still partnering with OWEB, but their role is looking at water valuation, transaction soundness, and the organizational capacity of the applicant to make sure that the project would be implemented as designed. And the other review team, similar to open solicitation grants, is a variety of staff from natural resource agencies at the federal, state, and tribal organizations familiar with Oregon, and in some cases working specifically in those regions where proposals come in from. But let's see, the 2 proposals that we're looking at, to summarize, the first one, the South Fork Little Butte Water Acquisition Project, was brought forward with Freshwater Trust as the applicant, Rogue River Watershed Council as a partner, and this project's in the Rogue Basin. They're requesting $109,875 from OWEB, with a total cost of the project $166,219. And the mechanism of the transaction is this project is looking at doing an irrigation efficiency upgrade on 9.8 acres on a tributary of the Rogue River, the South Fork Little Butte Creek, with the water saved from that efficiency project being left in stream, utilizing the conserved water application program that's available through Oregon Water Resources Department. The water saved out of that would be 0.08 cubic feet per second, and over irrigation season that equates to 14.7 acre feet of water that would be left in stream. The project does have ecological benefits. It's benefiting salmon, steelhead, and native trout in the stream. It's an important tributary to the Rogue Basin where there is recovery plans that specifically call for the need for improving stream flow and temperatures and other habitat benefits. Another ecological benefit of this project, it is paired with a multi-benefit project on that same property that involves abandoning an old push-up dam and irrigation ditch where fish get stranded, including listed species. But also it would allow for the property owners to work with the project partners to establish 13 acres of riparian forest in what had been irrigated pasture, with the idea that once that riparian vegetation gets established, that 13 acres of that portion of the water right would also be transferred in stream. The advantage of that is it would make the project the cost benefit ratio look a lot better for the amount of water that OWEB would be seeing go in stream for the amount of investment that might occur if the project is awarded funding. So those were some of the issues that we're looking at. These are senior 1907 water rights. And even though the cost is high in relation to the amount of water, there are multiple benefits that are associated with this project. And with some of the complexities here relate to the higher cost of the project, and when would that second phase of the additional water go in stream, and would we also be able to require some additional monitoring beyond the typical 5-year post-implementation status report monitoring of reduced water use, just to document that the OWEB investment is carrying forward. So I'll now move on to the other project that we are considering. And this project is the acquisition and ecological use of Wood River Valley 1864 priority water rights. And the applicant bringing this project forward is the California Waterfowl Association. And this project's in the Klamath Basin. And it's actually a bi-state project where the water rights are in Oregon, but the proposal is to have that water transferred downstream to benefit the Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge in California, just across the border. The OWEB amount requested is $400,000. The total project amount is $7.5 million. And that would be the total funds to do a permanent purchase of that water right, 25 cubic feet per second, or 3,750 acre feet of water, and leave that in stream from the upper tributaries where the water right originates in the Wood River system. And the water right is split between Wood River and then also a tributary, Crooked Creek. And that water would provide some ecological benefit, primarily to Crooked Creek, but some benefit to Wood River, and then also improve water levels in the upper Klamath Lake, a small amount of improvement to the Klamath River downstream of upper Klamath Lake, below Link Dam. But then that water would be routed through the irrigation delivery system out to the Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge, where it could benefit habitat for waterfowl in a critically depleted area where there just isn't much water for that lower part of the National Wildlife Refuge. So there are some ecological benefits in the last few drought years. Even though this is a senior 1864 water right, it is still junior to the Klamath tribe's time immemorial water rights. And those water rights have been able to make a call on these 1864 water rights. And over the last few drought years, there's been about a 50% reduction of that water right. So if there were an investment of funds to purchase that if we see continued drought conditions like we've seen over the last few years. There's the potential that only half of that water would be in stream and protectable on downstream to the lower point where it would be used at the Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge. So that's one of the regulatory complexities of the project. And I also wanted to add that this project is asking OWEB to pay for the 3rd year of a temporary transfer of the water right. In the Klamath Basin, water rights are going through an adjudication process that has been going on for a few decades now and could continue for another couple decades before the courts finalize everyone's water right claims in that basin. The complications that poses for this project is Oregon Water Resources Department is constrained because of that adjudication process to only being able to do temporary changes to water rights. Once an adjudication is completed, then those water claims become water rights, and then a permanent change would be possible. This project, when you look at the dollar amount for water gained, the cost benefit ratio is a little more favorable. However, there is not only the regulatory complexity that the water can get regulated off in the upper Klamath Basin. In the lower part of the Klamath Basin, the Bureau of Reclamation manages the water that comes out of Upper Klamath Lake and has to make a determination of how much flow they're leaving in stream for Klamath River salmon and how much goes on to the irrigation districts. And then also what portion of this water would make it onto the National Wildlife Refuge. In the last 2 years of the lease, there's been a much smaller fraction of that water making it to the National Wildlife Refuge. So it's, even though there's benefits for that water being in stream and in the lake along the way, we're not realizing, or the current lease that's been implemented over the last 2 years isn't realizing the full benefit that they had hoped for. Some of that water is not making it out to the lower National Wildlife Refuge. So that just gives you an overview of some of the complexities that we're dealing with. We're still evaluating as staff the different review comments that have come in from the agencies. And we are looking at conditions for both of these projects that could make a funding recommendation reasonable. And I'll leave it at that and see if there's any additional comments or questions that would help us bring an evaluation and a summary of the projects to the board in July.
Great, thanks, Brian. Looks like Liz has a hand up.
I do. Wow, that's a lot of information, Brian.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I have a question that might be helpful when you present this to the board. On the first one, on the Southwest Little Butte, in the beginning, you talked about the number of cubic feet that would be left in stream. And even as a layperson and having some knowledge of this, is there a way that you can put that in context for that stream or for, that area? When I just hear cubic feet, is there sort of a visual or something that, can help us understand the true benefit of that somehow? So that was and maybe there's not. And so I'll go back and try to visualize what a cubic foot is again. And then I really did like the fact that you talked about here are these ecological benefits, for this project, even though the acres seem small. And again, I'm more of a visual person. And so if there's a way to, put that on a screen or a map or an illustration, that'd be great. And then just a general piece about the Wood River Valley acquisition. Just to me, where I followed it pretty well, but where I kind of got lost is the potential all the different potential scenarios on the regulatory piece, what could happen. So if that could be, if there's maybe just for simpler minds to understand what that trade-off would be given if a different scenario kicked in, that'd be helpful. Thanks, really great presentation.
Oh, great. Well, thanks, Liz. I can work on that visualization piece just to get a better feel for a cubic foot per second or an acre foot, what that looks like on the ground. And then also just a better summary of the regulatory issues that are affecting that Wood River proposal.
Right, knowing that water rights are always complicated and historical. Thank you.
And it sounds like, Liz, you're also looking for, in addition to visualizing what is a cubic foot per second, how does that relate to the volume that's typically in that particular
in that area?
stream?
What is, just context for me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lisa?
Thanks, Dan. So this is to our federal partners that work in this area. If you can think about, are there other natural resource questions that we should be thinking about as we bring this to the board, tying to initiatives or priorities in your agencies, or how this work might link up? That might be helpful as well. Just thinking about the conversation, and I appreciate, Liz, your questions about the visualization, because I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, oh, I wish I could see a map or something to help from a layperson perspective. So I think I was just trying to make the connection with all the partners and how we might leverage the investment.
Liza Jane?
Thank you, Dan. Lisa, you may have been saying this, but I'd like to just start, Brian. That was really interesting. I hope that we have plenty of time on the agenda. I think there'll be lots of questions and engagement and just learning about this acquisition fund for us. So hopefully we can make that happen. And because there's so much effort and so much money and so many different projects in the Klamath now and forward, any way you can tie that in to show, that this too has value. It's not replicating. It's all, like Lisa, I think, is saying, how this is all working together and supporting all that work, because there can be a Klamath region fatigue of some sort that I hope doesn't occur, but just kind of helping us understand that. But really great. And I really loved all the information that you provided. So thank you.
Thanks, Liza Jane.
So I have a couple of comments. One is, Liz, I was reading this article in the New York Times about the Colorado River, and the visual they used for cubic foot per second, which helped me immensely, was to think about a cubic foot per second as a basketball passing a point in 1 second. So they were equating a cubic foot per second to a basketball. So if it's 5 cubic feet per second, it's 5 basketballs passing that point. So I was like, oh, okay, I get that. And then Lisa, thanks for yours. I was actually thinking about the same thing that Liza Jane just mentioned. And I would say that also applies to the South Fork Little Butte. I know our agency, in concert with the Forest Service in BLM, we, as I think folks know, we have our drinking water provider partnership where we fund restoration projects. And I believe we provided some funding for restoration on the South Fork Little Butte, in which came with match money from OWEB. So I think OWEB has invested money in restoration on the South Fork Little Butte as well. And so I think it would be good to be able to sort of talk to the board members about the additionality of, you know, the restoration investments that have already occurred and to what extent this sort of plugs into it. And yeah, Brian, man, super confusing on the Klamath. So however you can break that down into digestible, I was almost thinking of like a, you know, here's what you could get, here's what you get for the money. You know, it could be as much as this, but if this happens, it might be reduced down to this much or something like that. I don't know how to do that. But somebody's sharing a screen, and then we'll go to Chris after that.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I just popped up the map, one of the maps that was included in the South Fork Little Butte application to show how this ties into the ongoing restoration work down there. And what this map is showing is their current point of diversion is in this magenta circle down here in the lower right portion of the map. And this kind of yellow cross-hatched area beginning just downstream of the diversion all the way to the lower end of the reach is the restoration project. And you can see the green dots are large wood placements, and the revegetation area would be in the crosshatch. And that's what Brian was referring to regarding some uncertainty in terms of timing of how long they're going to need water to get those the plantings that they put in this riparian zone to the free to grow stage. And that will drive the timeline for getting the rest of the water rights in stream. Brian, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out also, when you look at that existing point of diversion and that long purple line down to where the point of use is, and that is where there's been fish stranding issues. And that is a secondary benefit of the project that I think is significant. But and then the other thing, getting back to Liz's question, just to put things into context a little bit, if I remember correctly, the South Fork Little Butte stream flows in the summertime are in that 10 to 30 cubic feet per second flow range. And so this project would be adding less than 1 CFS to that. So it's an incremental improvement, but with where this project is located, it's in a good location to be a demonstration for other water right holders up and down the Little Butte Creek system. And so there's that additional benefit that additional water rights could be left in. And there have been previous water transactions leaving water in stream in this region.
Great, thanks for that graphic, Eric. That was super helpful. Chris, go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Brian, a question on the Klamath project, and appreciate that presentation. Again, there's a lot of information there. One thing that came to mind in your presentation is that it sounds like the primary benefits would accrue in the California portion of the Klamath River, if I got that right, or maybe not, but if you could touch on that. And then it also made me think about the funding that OWEB provided for monitoring, or maybe it was restoration associated with the Klamath project, that special funding provided last year. And it makes me just wonder, does OWEB as a state agency have a policy around funding projects that may benefit Oregon? Maybe the primary benefits accrue outside of Oregon in a border state such as Washington or California. So Brian, maybe you could answer part of that, and maybe Lisa the second part.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, just to talk a little bit more about ecological benefits for the Wood River proposal. And that project would leave additional stream flows in, I believe it's about 3 to 5 miles of Crooked Creek. And that's a stream that does have native red band trout. And then in Wood River, also has red band trout present. And then that additional water that would be left in stream helps to maintain the lake levels for the two endangered ESA listed sucker species in Upper Klamath Lake, which is extremely critical that their spawning areas are often dewatered. And any additional lake volume helps to address that problem, even though 25 CFS or in a drought year, if we're only looking at 12 CFS, it's an incremental improvement, but it is a demonstration to other Upper Klamath tributary water right holders that there could be a program that would purchase some or all of their water rights and provide those benefits to the native trout species as well as the sucker species. But then that water, as it leaves the Upper Klamath Lake, provides some small degree of benefit for maintaining the flows that are necessary for the ESA listed salmon in the Klamath River system. And then a smaller amount of that water does make it on to the National Wildlife Refuge, where it provides the water needed to maintain the habitat for the waterfowl that are imperiled in a critical part of the Pacific Flyway.
Okay, that's super helpful. And sorry, I missed some of those details in your presentation. So it sounds like the primary benefits will accrue in Oregon with some ancillary benefits downstream into Northern California.
Correct. And it's my understanding that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a pot of funding that they are actively seeking water rights from that Upper Klamath area to help bring that water down to the National Wildlife Refuge. And they're currently evaluating this project. It sounds like they'll be making a decision in the next month or two as to whether they would help fund the potential permanent purchase of this water right.
Thanks for the additional info.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And to the second part of Chris's question, and I'm going to need Eric Williams' help here, but the investments need to be made in Oregon. And I think we would want to see, I don't know that we have a policy to your question of if there's benefit outside of Oregon, but the investments would need to be made in Oregon. And I would think we would want to see, some of the benefit of the outcomes to the Oregon side, but we're also recognizing we're part of a larger system. Is that fair?
Yeah, you got it, Lisa. That's exactly right. And in fact, I would say that in Brian's previous watershed, the Walla Walla, Brian did an awful lot of work in the Walla Walla Basin that had benefits to our neighbor to the north, as well as benefiting parts of the watershed in Oregon. And it's just a recognition of how watersheds work and don't respect our lines we draw on the map. But Lisa's absolutely right that the work has to be in Oregon, that we fund, and there can be benefits downstream. I think Brian did a great job explaining the kind of co-benefits that you get. I mean, to get water to the wildlife refuge in California, it's got to pass through the places Brian talked about, and that's going to benefit species in Oregon.
All right, thanks for the response to the second part of that question, Lisa and Eric. Appreciate it.
Along those lines, there was one other thing I wanted to mention regarding the Wood River project in the Klamath Basin. I mentioned that there's currently a 5-year temporary lease of that water to bring a portion of it down to the Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge in California. And recognizing the value of that, the California Waterfowl Association has been not only able to use private donations that have come to the organization, they've also received funds, several $100,000 from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to also help purchase that first 2 years of the lease. So it's an example of another state making an investment in Oregon, knowing that there's some benefit that would happen across the state line. And as Eric mentioned, there were similar investments in the Walla Walla River Valley, where I worked for 25 years, where we were working on irrigation efficiency projects that were primarily in Oregon and benefiting fish habitat in Oregon and fish passage, but also benefiting 19 miles further downstream into Washington, documented by state and federal and tribal fish biologists. So it just another example of bi-state benefits.
Hooray. All good stuff. Hey, Brian, I had one follow-up based on the conversation that you and Chris just had. I was just a little confused when you said that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was also funding this water. Is there a match coming from the Fed side to this OWEB money, and or are they two totally distinct funding avenues? I just got a little confused by that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this Wood River proposal is asking for $400,000 from OWEB to fund 1 year of that 5-year lease, but that money could also go towards a permanent purchase. So kind of a lease to own option. With the other potential funder, a similar request has gone to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that agency is currently evaluating a new appraisal of this water right to see if it's something that they're interested in making approximately a $6.2 million investment, depending on what that final appraisal looks like. So yes, there is a potential match that would occur for this project. But so far, there's only been $900,000 of match secured for this proposal. And that's the dollars that California Waterfowl Association has brought in from private donations and California Department of Fish and Wildlife. But the unsecured match would be this potential approximate $6 million to purchase the water right.
Gotcha. Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up there. Brian, do you know, I'm not aware of that ask to the Fish and Wildlife Service, but I'm wondering if that's coming in through Region 8, which is California for us, which includes the Klamath Basin, or do you know if that request is to our Region 1 Pacific Region office and who the point of contact is? I'm just curious.
I'm not sure. I have been talking, just one of our reviewers happened to be with Fish and Wildlife Service, and that reviewer knew that it was being considered, but it was going to have to wait until an appraisal was completed and looked at, and the Fish and Wildlife Service realty people had to evaluate it as well. And so they haven't made a determination yet on their end whether they're going to fund it. And I do not know which regional office it's coming through.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's fine. I can track that down pretty easily. Appreciate it.
Any other comments on the water acquisition topic? And if not, we can, that was the last agenda item, so we can all get close to 15 minutes back in our schedule if nobody has anything else. Lindsay.
Sorry, I have a quick suggestion. I didn't see anything on the agenda for like future agenda items. And I just wanted to take a minute and check in and see if this is not on staff's agenda already. I would like to entertain an idea for this committee to revisit the stakeholder engagement grant title. I know that there's been some conversation around this, and then there's been some other partners and folks who have brought it up, and just kind of revisiting what that context of the word stakeholder could mean. So I'd love to see that on the agenda if folks are open to having a discussion about just what that means, and maybe the potential for renaming If we do go that direction, I would love for us to develop a proposal and send it over to the DEI committee for review and input as well. Looking at the agenda or the schedule, I will not be at the September 7th meeting. So December 7th looks like it might be the next grant committee meeting, but just propose that to the co-chairs, which I realize one is not here now. So would like to circle back on that.
Great suggestion. Thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think, Lindsay, I appreciate it also that you brought that up, because we've been hearing that concern from folks, and it would be good for us to have a full vetting of it. And I think the committee is a good place to start. So I might want to just touch base with you to develop some background information to provide to the committee, and then proceed from there. But well worth the conversation.
Do other folks have ideas for topics for this committee? Either now or in the future. I mean, we get them clearly from OWEB staff, but as committee members, we have the opportunity to raise our own agenda items to the extent we want to. Keep it in mind for the future, and I think we can call the meeting to an end. I'll try to turn on my video, see if it allows me to speak and visualize at the same time. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what's going on with the internet. But thanks, everybody. Nicole,
all.
I think we're